Most men don't fail because they lack motivation. They fail because they're emotionally undisciplined children inside grown bodies. You think you need to feel inspired to win? That's the first lie. Motivation is a spark. Emotional control is a power plant. One flickers when the wind changes. The other runs through storms. If your mood dictates your action, you are not in control of your life. Your emotions own you. You've been programmed to worship motivation. Watch a video, feel hyped, make promises. Then what? The next morning you're tired, slightly stressed, slightly bored, and suddenly your big dreams evaporate. Why? Because your internal state shifted and you followed it like a dog on a leash. That's not ambition, that's weakness. Powerful men do not negotiate with their feelings. They command them. Let me break something down that most people are too soft to understand. Speaking in tongues isn't about religion. It's about identity. It's about learning a new internal language that weak men cannot hear. The average man speaks the language of comfort, excuses, and emotional reaction. I don't feel like it. I'm stressed. I'm overwhelmed. That's the vocabulary of the average. When you decide to become dangerous, you start speaking a different tongue. The language of control. The language of discipline. The language where feelings are irrelevant and standards are absolute. When a weak man gets angry, he explodes. When he gets sad, he collapses. When he gets excited, he overcommits. He is predictable. He is readable. He is controllable. Emotional men are easy to manipulate because they broadcast their internal state to the world. A dominant man is silent, centered, unmoved. You cannot tell if he's tired. You cannot tell if he's stressed. You cannot tell if he's under pressure. That emotional neutrality is power. It's psychological armor. You think motivation builds empires? No. Control does. Control when you're bored. Control when you're insulted. Control when you're insulted. Control when you're winning. Especially when you're winning. Because success destroys more men than failure ever will. They get emotional. They celebrate too hard. They relax. They drift. And they fall. A disciplined mind does not spike high or crash low. It stays calibrated, always. Speaking in this new tongue means you stop saying, I feel, and start saying, I execute. It means your identity shifts from reactive to intentional. You don't wake up and ask your emotions for permission. You issue commands to yourself like a general. Gym, done. Work, done. No debate, no drama, no emotional committee meeting in your head, just action. And here's the brutal truth that you cannot control your face, your tone, your impulses. You cannot control money, women, influence, or respect. Everything valuable requires delayed gratification and emotional restraint. The man who masters himself becomes unpredictable to his enemies and reliable to himself. That's dominance. That's leverage. That's power. Most men don't want power. They want comfort disguised as ambition. They want to feel powerful without doing the cold, repetitive, boring work of emotional mastery. They chase adrenaline instead of control, they chase hype instead of structure, and they wonder why their life feels unstable. You are unstable because your emotions are your leader. Replace them. Emotional control is not suppression, it's direction. You feel anger, channel it into training. You feel fear, convert it into preparation. You feel doubt, convert it into execution. A weak man vents. A strong man converts. That conversion process is the real transformation. That is the shift in language. That is speaking in a tongue only. Disciplined men understand. Most men are addicted to motivation because it feels powerful, it feels like movement, it feels like progress, but feelings are not results. That surge of energy you get from a speech, a song, or a late-night decision to change your life is nothing more than a spark. Sparks look impressive in the dark. They flash, they grab attention, but they die just as fast. If your entire strategy for success is built on emotional spikes, you are building your future on something designed to disappear. Ask yourself a brutal question. What happens on the days you don't feel like it? What happens when you wake up tired, irritated, distracted, or bored? If your productivity collapses the moment your mood shifts, then your mood is your boss. And if your mood is your boss, you are not in control. That is not strength. That is dependency disguised as ambition. High performers understand a principle that average men ignore. Consistency beats intensity. Intensity feels heroic. Consistency feels boring. Intensity is loud. Consistency is silent. But empires are not built on loud moments. They are built on silent repetition. Motivation pushes you for a day. Emotional control carries you for decades. That is the difference between someone who tries hard and someone who wins. Look at your own patterns. When you feel inspired, you plan everything. New routines, new goals, big declarations. Then life applies pressure. A bad night of sleep, an argument, a minor setback. Suddenly the energy is gone, the plans feel heavy. You postpone, you negotiate, you justify. That gap between your inspired version and your tired version is where your future is decided. Most men lose right there, not because they lack talent, not because they lack opportunity, because they lack control over their internal state. Real power begins when you detach performance from emotion. You go to the gym whether you feel strong or weak. You work whether you feel confident or doubtful. You execute whether you feel excited or empty. That separation is elite. That separation is rare. When action is no longer dependent on feeling, you become predictable to yourself and unstoppable to others. There is a psychological advantage in this that most people never grasp. When you operate without emotional fluctuation, you conserve energy. You don't waste time riding highs and recovering from lows. You don't burn yourself out chasing excitement. You become steady, focused, efficient. That steadiness compounds. Over weeks, months, years, it creates distance between you and everyone who relies on adrenaline to function. The uncomfortable truth is this: motivation is for amateurs. It's a starting mechanism, not a lifestyle. Professionals show up because they decided to, not because they feel like it. The world rewards the man who performs on his worst days, not the one who shines on his best days. Anyone can work hard when they're inspired. Very few can work hard when they're tired, criticized, or bored. That is the dividing line. If you train yourself to act regardless of emotion, something powerful happens. Your confidence stops being fragile. It stops depending on praise, momentum, or mood. It becomes rooted in evidence. Evidence that you do what you say. Evidence that you follow through. Evidence that your word to yourself means something. That kind of self-trust cannot be faked. It is earned through controlled repetition. The man who depends on motivation waits. The man who masters emotional control moves. One is reactive, the other is decisive. One needs perfect conditions. The other creates results in imperfect conditions. Over time, the gap between them becomes massive. If you want to operate at a higher level, stop chasing sparks. Build the engine. Train your mind to detach from emotion and attach to execution. Because the moment you no longer need to feel powerful to perform powerfully, you step into a different league entirely. You say you want power, yet you let your emotions dictate your behavior. That contradiction is the reason most men stay average. Anger flares up and you lose control. Fear creeps in and you hesitate. Frustration hits and your discipline collapses. Then you wonder why your results are inconsistent. It's simple. Anything you cannot control will eventually control you. Emotions are not the enemy. Lack of command over them is. Anger can sharpen you or expose you. Fear can prepare you or paralyze you. Stress can forge resilience or break your structure. The difference is not the emotion itself. The difference is who is in charge. If you react automatically, you are operating on impulse. If you choose your response, you are operating on authority. Think about how predictable emotional men are. Trigger their ego and they explode. Challenge their confidence and they shrink. Offer temptation and they fold. They broadcast every internal fluctuation on their face, in their voice, in their posture. That makes them easy to manipulate, easy to read, easy to defeat. In business, in relationships, in competition, predictability is vulnerability. Control begins with awareness. Most men don't even recognize when emotion is driving them. They call it being real or being honest. No, it's being undisciplined. Real strength is feeling the surge of anger and choosing silence. Feeling fear and choosing preparation. Feeling doubt and choosing action. The emotion still exists, but it no longer dictates the outcome. That shift is subtle, but it separates leaders from followers. Consider how much damage uncontrolled emotion causes. One impulsive message, one reckless decision, one moment of ego. Years of work can collapse because a man couldn't pause for 10 seconds. Emotional mastery is not about suppressing everything. It is about creating space between stimulus and response. In that space lies power. In that pause lies dominance. When you master your emotional reactions, you gain strategic advantage. You can negotiate without revealing desperation. You can compete without showing insecurity. You can lead without broadcasting uncertainty. Calm composure under pressure unsettles opponents. They expect reaction. They expect noise. When they get steadiness instead, they lose leverage. The man who controls his internal state is not cold. He is calculated. He is not robotic. He is precise. He understands that emotions are energy, and energy must be directed. Anger directed into training becomes progress. Anxiety directed into preparation becomes performance. Desire directed into discipline becomes achievement. Without direction, that same energy becomes chaos. Most people live in reaction mode. Notifications trigger them. Opinions trigger them. Minor inconveniences trigger them. Their mood swings throughout the day based on external circumstances. That is a fragile existence. If your peace depends on everything going right, you will rarely experience peace. Strength is the ability to remain centered when things go wrong. There's also a deeper layer. Emotional control builds self-respect. When you prove to yourself that you will not break under pressure, you begin to trust yourself. That trust becomes internal stability. Stability becomes confidence, not loud confidence, not performative confidence. Quiet confidence rooted in the knowledge that nothing can push you off your path without your permission. The world constantly tests you. Insults, setbacks, delays, temptation, failure. Every test is an invitation to react emotionally. Every reaction weakens your authority. Every controlled response strengthens it. Over time, these moments compound. You either build a reputation as someone volatile and unstable, or as someone composed and formidable. If you want leverage in any arena, start with internal governance. Monitor your triggers. Slow down your responses. Choose actions that align with your standards, not your temporary feelings. The man who commands his emotions commands his decisions. The man who commands his decisions commands his outcomes. And outcomes, not feelings, define your position in this world. Here's the uncomfortable reality most men avoid. The moment you start negotiating with your feelings, you lose. Discipline begins exactly where comfort ends. If you only move when it feels good, convenient, or exciting, you are not disciplined. You are emotionally dependent. And emotional dependency destroys potential. Every goal you claim to want will eventually require you to act when you don't feel like acting. That's not a possibility. That's a guarantee. There will be mornings when your body feels heavy, evenings when your focus is gone, days when nothing seems urgent and everything feels pointless. That is the battlefield. Not the days you're motivated, not the days you're praised. The quiet, ordinary, uninspiring days where your mind whispers, skip it. Most men lose the war in those whispers. Discipline is not dramatic, it's not loud. It doesn't look impressive on social media. It's repetitive, structured, and often boring. And boredom is the filter that removes weak men from the game, because boredom exposes whether you're committed to results or addicted to stimulation. If you need constant excitement to stay engaged, you will never build anything substantial. Real success is built on repetition long before it becomes rewarding. You say you want to level up, yet you crumble the moment discomfort appears. Slight inconvenience, slight criticism, slight fatigue. Suddenly your standards drop. That is not a lack of talent. That is a lack of tolerance for discomfort. Discipline is tolerance. It is the capacity to continue executing while your emotions protest. There is a psychological shift that happens when you stop listening to how you feel and start honoring what you decided. You begin to separate identity from mood. You don't say, I don't feel productive today. You say, productive is who I am. You don't say, I'm not in the mood to train. You say, training is part of my standard. Standards eliminate debate. Feelings create debate. Look closely at high-level performers in any field. They don't rely on bursts of energy. They rely on systems. Systems remove choice. Systems remove choice. Systems reduce emotional negotiation. When your actions are pre-decided, your feelings become irrelevant. You execute because it's scheduled, because it's required, because it aligns with your identity. That consistency compounds faster than talent ever could. Comfort is seductive because it feels harmless. Skipping one workout seems harmless. Delaying one task seems harmless. Relaxing just this once seems harmless. But discipline is not broken in dramatic moments. It erodes in small compromises. Every time you choose comfort over commitment, you teach your brain that your word means nothing. Over time, that self-betrayal becomes a pattern. And here's what most men don't understand. Discipline builds psychological resilience beyond the task itself. When you consistently do hard things voluntarily, your threshold for stress increases. Pressure stops feeling overwhelming. Delays stop feeling catastrophic. You develop internal toughness that transfers into every domain of life. Business, relationships, competition. You become harder to shake. Weak men chase comfort and call it balance. Strong men chase growth and accept discomfort as the cost. Growth is uncomfortable because it forces adaptation. It forces effort. It forces repetition without immediate reward. If you cannot tolerate that, you will remain exactly where you are. The moment you stop waiting to feel ready is the moment your progress accelerates. Action creates clarity. Action creates momentum. Action builds confidence. Waiting for the perfect emotional state keeps you stagnant. Discipline does not require perfect conditions. It requires decision followed by repetition. If you want results that most people don't have, you must be willing to operate in conditions most people avoid. Tired but focused. Bored but consistent. Unmotivated but executing. That is where separation happens. That is where average ends and advancement begins. Walk into any room and observe carefully. The loudest man is rarely the strongest. The most reactive man is rarely the most powerful. True dominance is quiet, controlled, calculated. Emotional neutrality is not weakness. It is psychological superiority. If people can read you instantly, they can influence you instantly. Most men leak information through their expressions, their tone, their posture, annoy them and their jaw tightens. Praise them and they light up. Challenge them and they get defensive. They are broadcasting their internal state like an open signal. That transparency might feel authentic, but in competitive environments, it is a liability. When others can predict your reactions, they can steer your behavior. Emotional neutrality changes the dynamic entirely. When you remain steady under pressure, you create uncertainty in others. They cannot gauge whether their words affected you. They cannot tell if you're stressed or relaxed. They cannot determine whether you're offended or indifferent. That ambiguity shifts power in your favor. Unreadable men are difficult to manipulate. Pressure reveals character. Deadlines, conflict, financial risk, public criticism, these are stress tests. Emotional men spike under pressure. They rush decisions. They overreact. They try to prove something. Calm men slow down. They assess. They respond strategically. When everyone else is escalating emotionally, the man who stays composed gains clarity. And clarity is leverage. Think about negotiations. If the other side senses desperation, they push harder. If they sense insecurity, they demand more. But if you remain measured, controlled, almost indifferent, the balance shifts. They start questioning their position. They start revealing more than they should. Neutrality forces the other party to overplay their hand. The same principle applies in leadership. Teams look for stability. If a leader panics during setbacks, morale collapses. If a leader explodes over minor mistakes, trust erodes. Consistency and emotional response creates psychological safety. It signals strength. It tells everyone in the room that volatility is not tolerated. A composed leader becomes an anchor in chaos. There is also a personal advantage. Emotional spikes consume energy. Anger drains focus. Excitement can distort judgment. Anxiety narrows perception. When you maintain equilibrium, your cognitive bandwidth remains intact. You think clearly. You process information objectively. You make decisions based on logic rather than impulse. Over time, that clarity compounds into better outcomes. Neutrality does not mean apathy. It means control. You still feel everything. You simply refuse to let it dictate your external behavior. You choose when and how to express emotion. That choice is power. Reactivity is automatic. Control is intentional. Most men equate emotional expression with strength. They believe intensity proves passion. In reality, uncontrolled intensity exposes instability. Stability is intimidating. A man who does not flinch under criticism unsettles critics. A man who does not celebrate excessively under praise signals self-assurance. When external validation stops affecting you, you become internally grounded. In competitive arenas, composure often determines victory more than raw ability. Athletes lose because they panic. Entrepreneurs fail because they overreact. Investors collapse because they cannot manage fear. Emotional neutrality allows you to operate at a consistent baseline regardless of circumstances. Consistency outperforms volatility. Imagine facing adversity without visible frustration. Imagine facing success without visible arrogance. That balance commands respect. People instinctively trust the individual who appears centered. They perceive steadiness as competence. The man who masters neutrality becomes difficult to provoke, difficult to pressure, and difficult to destabilize. In a world driven by impulsive reactions and public emotional displays, composure stands out. It signals depth. It signals control. It signals dominance without a single word spoken. You don't rise to the level of your motivation. You fall to the level of your identity. That's the part most men refuse to confront. They chase intensity. They chase short bursts of energy. They chase moments where they feel unstoppable. But intensity is temporary. Identity is permanent. And until your identity shifts, your results will keep snapping back to the same baseline. You say you want to be disciplined, successful, respected. But who do you believe you are at your core? If deep down you see yourself as inconsistent, easily distracted, or average, your behavior will always return to that standard. You can push hard for a week, maybe a month, but eventually your self-image pulls you back. Identity beats effort every single time. Weak language reveals weak identity. I'm trying. I'll see. I hope. That vocabulary exposes uncertainty. High performers speak differently, not because it sounds impressive, but because it reflects internal alignment. I execute. I train. I build. There is no emotional drama attached. It is simply who they are. When action becomes part of identity, it stops feeling optional. This is where most men sabotage themselves. They treat discipline like an activity instead of a trait. They think working hard occasionally makes them disciplined. It doesn't. Discipline is not something you do. It is something you are, and being requires consistency. You don't become respected because you demand it once. You become respected because your behavior aligns with that standard daily. Identity-based thinking eliminates negotiation. If you identify as someone who trains, you train. If you identify as someone who keeps promises, you keep them. There is no internal debate. Debate happens when identity is unclear. When you are unsure who you are, every decision feels heavy. Every task feels optional. Clarity removes friction. Look at how people justify inconsistency. That's just how I am. Exactly. That is the problem. You've accepted a weak identity and then act surprised when your actions match it. If you constantly break commitments, stop labeling it as a temporary lapse. Recognize it as an identity issue. Until you redefine who you are, your habits will continue to reflect your current self-concept. There is power in repetition tied to identity. Every time you execute despite resistance, you reinforce a new self-image. Every time you follow through, you cast a vote for the man you claim to be. Over time, those votes accumulate. The shift becomes internal. You no longer force discipline. You expect it from yourself. High-status individuals operate from identity, not emotion. They don't wake up asking if they feel confident. They operate as if confidence is a baseline trait. They don't ask if they feel productive. Productivity is embedded in their self-definition. That internal framing changes posture, tone, decisions, and long-term outcomes. Intensity without identity leads to burnout. You push aggressively, then collapse. You overcommit, then disappear. That cycle destroys credibility. Identity creates sustainability. It allows steady output without dramatic swings. It removes the need for constant external stimulation because the behavior aligns with who you believe you are. If you want permanent change, stop obsessing over motivation and start interrogating your self-image. Ask whether your current identity supports your goals. If it doesn't, upgrade it deliberately. Speak differently. Decide differently. Act differently. Not for applause, but for alignment. When your actions and identity match, execution becomes automatic. Standards become non-negotiable. You no longer rely on mood, hype, or validation. You move because movement is consistent with who you are. And once that alignment locks in, progress accelerates without emotional chaos or dramatic effort spikes. Freedom is not doing whatever you feel like doing. That's indulgence. That's impulse. Real freedom is control. The man who cannot control his urges is not free. He is owned. Owned by distraction, owned by temptation, owned by short-term pleasure. And a man who is owned by his impulses will never own anything substantial in this world. You want financial independence? Control your spending. You want a powerful physique? Control your diet and training consistency. You want influence? Control your words and reactions. Every form of external power is built on internal restraint. Without it, success becomes unstable. You might touch it briefly, but you won't hold it. Look at how easily most men are steered. A notification pulls their attention. A craving dictates their meal. A moment of boredom sends them into endless scrolling. These small impulses seem harmless, but they compound into a lifestyle of distraction. And distraction destroys momentum. Momentum is everything. Once it's broken repeatedly, rebuilding becomes harder each time. Impulse control is not glamorous. It doesn't look impressive, but it separates leaders from followers. The leader can delay gratification. He can sacrifice today for tomorrow. He can endure temporary discomfort for long-term leverage. The follower chases immediate relief, immediate pleasure, immediate validation. One builds assets, the other builds regret. There is a psychological strength that forms when you consistently override impulses. Each time you say no to a distraction, you reinforce authority over yourself. Each time you stick to your standard despite temptation, your self-respect increases. That self-respect becomes internal stability. Stability becomes confidence, and confidence becomes presence. Many men misunderstand freedom. They believe structure limits them. In reality, structure liberates them. When your routines are solid, your priorities clear, and your impulses managed, your mental bandwidth expands. You don't waste energy debating trivial choices. You don't oscillate between extremes. You operate with clarity and direction. The absence of control creates chaos. Financial chaos from reckless decisions. Physical chaos from inconsistent habits. Emotional chaos from unchecked reactions. Chaos feels like freedom at first because it lacks restriction, but over time it becomes suffocating. Debt suffocates. Poor health suffocates. Damaged reputation suffocates. All of it traces back to a failure of restraint. Delayed gratification is a competitive advantage. Most people cannot tolerate waiting. They need rewards immediately. They need results instantly. The man who can wait while continuing to execute gains an edge that compounds over years. He invests while others consume. He builds while others entertain themselves. He prepares while others procrastinate. Control also protects you from self-sabotage during success. Many men rise quickly and then collapse because they indulge too early. They relax discipline. They celebrate excessively. They assume momentum will sustain itself. Without continued restraint, gains evaporate. Sustainable freedom requires ongoing control. The discipline to regulate impulses extends beyond habits. It influences speech, posture, decision-making. The man who pauses before reacting avoids unnecessary conflict. The man who thinks before committing avoids unnecessary loss. Strategic patience allows better judgment. Better judgment produces better outcomes. Control does not eliminate enjoyment. It enhances it. When pleasure is earned rather than impulsive, it feels deserved. When rest follows productivity, it restores rather than weakens. Balance achieved through discipline feels different from indulgence disguised as relaxation. If you want leverage in life, start by mastering the smallest impulses, the choice to focus, the choice to delay, the choice to stay aligned with your standards. These decisions seem minor in isolation, but they define trajectory. Over time, the man who governs himself accumulates options. Options create real freedom. And real freedom belongs only to those strong enough to control themselves. If you want to be feared, respected, and untouchable, start here. Not with motivation, not with excitement, with control. Control your reactions, control your habits, control your internal dialogue. When your emotions stop dictating your decisions, you become sovereign. And a sovereign man does not beg the world for opportunity, he takes it. So stop chasing motivation like a dopamine addict. Build emotional command like a warrior. Because the day you no longer need to feel good to perform is the day you become unstoppable.